Well, hello, everyone. It is 1:30, so we're going to get started. So first of all, thanks for coming to this session. It's called Read It Again, Incorporating Shared Reading Strategies with Children Who Use AAC. My name is Jillian McCarthy, and I am an associate professor at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in the Department of Audiology and Speech Pathology. And I love to talk about literacy. In fact, I see a couple of my former students on this talk. And so I'm excited. I wish I could see your faces. I'm not going to lie. But I have also been doing a lot of Zoom calls. I'm sure you all have as well. So I'm going to try to keep a look at the chat and a look at who's here, and hopefully talk into the camera. I have a tendency to look around. So first off, before we get started, there are a couple of disclosures that I have to provide for you. One is a financial disclosure in that I am employed by the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and receive a salary from them. However, I do not have any non-financial disclosures to reveal, and the opinions of the materials and products that I've incorporated into this presentation are those of myself and my interpretation of the literature. Okay, so just to give us an outline of basically what we're going to do over the next 90 minutes, and I've tried to leave at least 10 minutes, if not 15 minutes at the end for folks to ask questions. However, if you have a question as we go along, please put it in the chat box or even unmute yourself if you're able to do that and go ahead and ask. I'm really like conversation instead of just listening to myself talk. And also I am presenting this from my home, as many people are today, and my neighbors, the people that mow their lawn, just got here. So if it sounds a little noisy outside, I apologize. So the overview for our 90 minutes today, we're going to first talk just quickly about literacy, so the rationale for why we should be reading and why parents are so instrumental in reading. And then we're going to talk about some shared reading. So discussion specifically about what shared reading is and what are two possible strategies to utilize. So there are two specific strategies that have been used with kids who use augmentative alternative communication or would benefit from my AAC strategies or assistive technology strategies. And so what are those? What do they look like? And how maybe we could incorporate them? And then I also want to talk about how to add phonological awareness. So looking at examples of shared reading or dialogic reading strategies, and then ways to add some of those phonological components, and my rationale for why we should be including more phonological strategies and helping parents talk about those at home, because they are critical for reading success, specifically word reading success. And then talk about a few out-of-the-box ideas. I'm calling them out-of-the-box ideas because as the chancellor of the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, who I see often lately because I'm on a couple of committees that meet with him, he likes to call this the new normal. So he's like, get used to Zoom being on the new normal, with the hope that we are back to normal, you know, sooner than later. But what are some ideas for sharing reading strategies or shared reading strategies in the new normal that include parents? So how can we actually use technology in a way that makes sense and in a way that is seamless with what we're trying to do, which is learn and talk and experience. Okay, so why talk about literacy? Well, we all know it's critical for academic, employment, and social success. We can't do anything in a day without coming across literacy. Everything we do every single day is literacy-based. And the reality, literacy is an umbrella. It's an umbrella for word recognition and then language comprehension. And we have to have both of those in order to actually have good literacy skills. So what we do know about reading, though, for individuals who use AAC supports or would benefit from AAC supports is that roughly 70 to 90% of individuals who use AAC supports do not have functional language or literacy abilities. Now, this stat was first talked about in 1993. However, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, they looked at the stats again, and the reality is we haven't moved that bar very far. And if you think about it, we're almost 20 years in, or at least over 15 years in, and we know a lot about literacy. We know so much about literacy when it comes to children who are talking, but how do we have access to that literacy, and how do we teach literacy for kids who are nonverbal? So specifically, we need evidence-based practice, and we need interventions for children who use AAC to learn language and literacy. So we really need to work and bring both together. So what is the evidence base that we have in research labs? It's really easy for me to have a very controlled study, but then how does that actually work in a classroom? How can we actually get good reading practice at home with kids? Because again, educational, vocational, and social impacts. And I think for kids who use AAC, there's even more of an impact than there is for children who might be using speech to communicate. Or even if you're using speech to communicate and you're using AAC strategies to regulate yourself. We have to have literacy, right? Because now we can actually have a list to tell us how we should move forward, or we have a list of telling us where we should be. We have a way to spell. Spelling is critical in that we can't put all vocabulary onto a kid's device. And so we have to have phonological awareness and letter sound correspondence in order to spell and to have access to educational, vocational, and social. All right, so as we know, it's well documented that children who use AAC have different reading experiences than children who do not use AAC. So what do we know? Well, we know from research that Janice Light has done is that parents report different types of interactions. Not only did parents report this in a survey, but parents also demonstrated that they had different types of reading interactions with their children who might be using AAC devices. So one of the things is that parents seem to have control of the interaction. The child wasn't in control of the interaction, the parent was. We do know that shared reading strategies are critical for young kids because it really is a way to work on not only literacy, but also to work on language, in that we can work on the receptive and we can work on the expressive language. And we know that that oral language is really that basement to build our literacy house. So for kids who are using AAC, parents really had control. They were making the comments. They were asking the questions. If you think about a kid, and you may have read recently to a small child. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and my 4-year-old really loves to read. That is his favorite activity. If he's not watching a movie, he has a book in hand, and he asks lots of questions. And oftentimes they are questions we've talked about multiple times over, or he gives lots of comments. And again, these are comments that you almost know that they're coming. And if you skip a page, he will even make a comment, hey, you skipped that page. My kids also oftentimes know a lot of the words to the books because we've read them so many times. And so if you mess up, they will make a comment like, hey, you didn't read that right. That's not how it goes. Parents of children who use AAC devices also reported that their kids ask fewer questions and they make fewer comments. Oftentimes this is because maybe the vocabulary isn't on the device, or we haven't stopped to ask the question, or to even pause enough to provide enough time for a child to ask a question. So I think if anything, if you get anything out of this talk is that reading time, and encourage parents that you're working with, reading time needs to have lots of pauses. And within that pause, we need to allow enough time for a child to engage with their device, to ask a question or comment. The other thing that Janice Light and her colleagues reported was that engagement in the physical interactions of the book were typically the highest amongst kids who use AAC or benefit from AAC strategies, in that the kids were asked to turn the pages or point to a picture upon request, whereas they were not seeing this with the children who are using speech, and we're commenting a little bit more often. We're pointing to things on their own. And again, just not enough time. A lot of parents have reported that, you know, they don't read as often because there's just not enough time. And those of you who either have young kids or have older children might remember you run out of time. And I think sometimes for kids who have motor impairments on top of it, the additional stretching and feeding and making sure everything else is done, sometimes reading a book is just another thing that has to happen, and it's something that oftentimes gets left out. We also know from the literature that there seems to be a lack of access to AAC during reading. So specifically, Light and her colleagues in 1994 did a study in which they had 3 families, and they did a baseline, then an intervention, and then they looked at generalization. And during those baseline sessions, and even looking at the generalization sessions, they found that children who use AAC, specifically during home reading opportunities, did not have access to their AAC device or strategies on a regular basis. So oftentimes it's put away, or it's charging, or it's not out, and yet reading is really this great language opportunity. It's this really great opportunity for us to work on vocabulary and to work on syntax. And yet, if we don't have the AAC device out, it's really difficult for that child to start building that expressive language. The other thing that we know from the literature, and this sort of goes across, is that kids who use AAC devices have fewer writing and drawing opportunities. So parents report providing fewer opportunities. And also within the literature, we see that parents do not model as much on keyboards. So why is it important to be modeling? Well, it's important to be modeling for later spelling, but also it can provide assistance with phonological awareness. So it provides us an opportunity to actually access and participate in those phonological awareness activities without adding anything new. So it's important. So let's jump into this shared reading idea. And I'd love to hear in the chat box, if you have it open, what you know about shared reading, or what you've heard about shared reading. I'll give you a minute to type something. Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm gonna keep going, and hopefully this isn't complete review for you all. All right, so shared reading. Okay, I've got one person. They said honestly not too much. Excellent. Then hopefully this is new information. Shared reading. So some of you. Okay, excellent. So we got another person that said that they like to do it a lot, typing things, and then they spend a lot of time on one text and the students repeat the word or phrase. Okay, excellent. Okay, so shared reading really comes out of this idea of dialogic reading strategies. Dialogic reading strategies have been successful in enhancing language and overall reading comprehension skills for kids who are young. So we know that shared reading or reading dialogic strategies really come from this interaction of the book. So you'll see shared reading or dialogic reading sort of used interchangeably. So dialogic reading strategies, if any of you ever go on the Reading Rockets website, if you don't, I highly recommend it. So Reading Rockets is a website that is updated with or updated by the federal government. So the Department of Education updates it, but it's done by the leading reading researchers across the country. And so typically these are reading researchers that are looking at typical reading development, but then also looking at reading development for kids who are struggling. So, and that's across the board. So that could be kids who are using AAC, and that could be a child who is dyslexic. So, you sort of have that spectrum. So anybody who's struggling with reading. And so this shared reading is really this idea that we have a shared reading space. And while we have this shared reading space, our book, we're going to use some sort of strategy. So these dialogic reading strategies in order to get to this increased language, which would be vocabulary, which would be syntax, which would be morphosyntax. So working on those plurals, working on any prefixes or suffixes that are added to a word, changing that meaning, being able to add to the semantics. But then on top of it, looking at overall reading comprehension. So how are we going to map what we're learning in that book onto our background knowledge, thinking about the vocabulary we have to advance that child so they understand a little bit more. So dialogic reading strategies or shared reading strategies use this idea called peer. So peer is this idea that we're going to prompt the child to say something about the book. We're then going to evaluate the child's response. So as the adult, I evaluate the child's response. So if my son was to say, we're currently reading a book called The Big Bad Boogie. If you have not seen this book, jump on Amazon and check it out, or just jump on YouTube. You can also watch it on YouTube. So Who's Afraid of Big Bad Boogie? And there's a second one, but he's a big fan of the Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Boogie. And so if he was to say, green boogie, I might say, yeah, that's a big green boogie. So I'm going to then expand it. So I would evaluate and say, okay, he's got one adjective and he's got the noun. Let's describe it a little bit more. So you might say, yeah, big boogie, that's a big green boogie, and accentuate that green part. And then you repeat the prompt to make sure that the child's learned from the expansion. So you're going to add to it, you're going to repeat it, you'd want the child then to repeat it again. And you're just going to keep going. So basically the book is this shared space, and we're focusing on increasing our vocabulary, we're working on our syntax, and we're working on our morphosyntax. And by working on all those, we're going to be able to have better reading comprehension. All right, so when we think about kids who use AAC, though, or would benefit from AAC strategies, there is some work looking at the impact of shared reading with those children. And again, the work is really focused on vocabulary learning, it's focused on prompt engagement, and it's focused on syntax learning. So when we think about these, specifically for vocabulary learning, York et al., so this came out of Penn State, Janice Light's group. April York was a doc student at Penn State. And what she did was she had 3 families, and they set it up, and they were looking at during shared reading, and they were using a National Geographic book. So it was very specific science vocabulary, which when you think about vocabulary, science vocabulary is very easy to depict. Their nouns, right? There were also specific nouns that the kids probably didn't know. So if we're thinking about maybe a book about volcanoes, there's lots of new interesting information when it comes to volcanoes. So we could talk about tectonic plates, we could talk about lava, we could talk about pumes, we could talk about different places that have volcanoes. So Hawaii, Italy. We can talk about all those different, very specific noun vocabulary. So what they did was they looked at 2 different books, and what they found was that by using this shared reading approach, which is you're modeling, you're asking a question, you're having the child respond to that question, you're then evaluating it, you're expanding upon it, and then you're having the child give you that response back. What they found was that those kids not only learned the vocabulary that they were targeting, so those new nouns, those new adjectives that they were talking about, but they were also able to generalize that information over to other books, to other information. So they were able to ask questions about that information, and they were able to generalize it to other situations. The other thing with prompting engagement is that we find that when we use shared reading strategies with kids, that the space, we have now a shared communication space. And so we now have this shared place to talk about and think about, because we're all talking about volcanoes, or we're all talking about another book that we recently were reading was The Day the Banana Went Bad. Okay, so now we can prompt engagement about talking about different types of fruit. We have this shared space of talking about what fruits we like, what fruits are in the book. And then we can actually expand upon that. And now we can talk about how there are bananas in the kitchen. And those bananas in the kitchen, well, what happens when they go bad? Well, we make them into banana bread. So it prompts this engagement, and then it also really carries over to this background knowledge, so we're able to share it across. And then also syntax. So if we think about it, and we look at the literature on what kids who use AAC or benefit from AAC strategies, when we look at their syntax, we often find that their MLU, so their mean length of utterance, is a little bit shorter. Well, part of that has to do with time, because communication is really fast. Another part of that has to do with not all of the words might be available on the AAC device. And also sometimes, well, I'm not really sure about syntax structure. Being able to play with syntax, being able to change it from a statement to a question. Kids who use AAC, we know, are really good at statements. They're not as good at asking questions. So even within shared reading, here's an opportunity for us to talk about how to change our question or our statements into questions. So being able to talk about adding those WH words. But I think the biggest part with shared reading is the vocabulary. We can teach so much vocabulary in a shared reading opportunity. And that, I think, is the biggest, when looking at shared reading with kids who use AAC, that has been the biggest push, is that idea of teaching and learning vocabulary, because we can read this book over and over and over again. And it gives us this opportunity to not only talk about the vocabulary word in the book, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about synonyms and antonyms. So being able to change it. So if the child tells me big boogie, I might say, yeah, it is a big boogie. It's a gigantic boogie. So again, go check out Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Boogie, because honestly, he is a gigantic boogie. Okay, so there are two possible strategies that have been tested with kids who use or benefit from AAC strategies. And what I'd like to do is actually go through both of these. I think both of them are well researched. Either one of them would work really, really well when working with kids, whether you're doing this at a distance online. So you're using Zoom, or you're using Teams, or you're using some other platform to talk about shared reading with a family, or if you're even in a classroom with a family, or even in their home. All right, so let's talk about RAP first. So RAP is the read, ask, answer, and prompt method. Okay, and this includes 4 critical elements. And within each of these steps, the big thing to remember is that you want some wait time. And so Kathy Binger and Jennifer Kent Walsh came up with this strategy, the RAP strategies, the read, ask, answer, and prompt strategy. And they said that kids need at least 5 minutes. They have tried this strategy with parents, and they have also used this strategy with paraprofessionals or parapros in the classroom. And what they have found, and they've used this across with kids, is that kids actually are getting better in vocabulary, and they're getting better in their syntax when they're using the read, ask, answer, prompt method. So what are those 4 steps? Well, specifically in step 1, you want to read. So the very first step is to read, and the adult reads the text on the page and is going to provide this aided language input by modeling 2 symbols on the AAC device. So we're actually modeling only 2 possible symbols and nothing but 2 possible symbols. All right, then you're going to pause to observe what the child has taken in. Okay, so you read it, you pause, and you model the 2. So if we're talking, we're going to go back to the Big Bad Boogie, and thank you, TAAT for, who I think it's Rebecca. If it's not, correct me. But who put the Amazon link? It is Rebecca. Okay, good. Who put the link to Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Boogie in the chat box. So again, like, it's a really cute, funny book, and let's get real. Kids like to talk about boogers. So I say go with it. And it actually, the book, sorry, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but the book incorporates all sorts of different fairy tales. And so you can then go back and you can talk about those fairy tales, or read the fairy tales and then talk about it in the Big Bad Boogie. And so again, we can bring in that background knowledge, we can bring in that vocabulary, we can create all sorts of different things. Talking about, do you remember? All right, so we read the Big Bad Boogie. In the Big Bad Boogie, he lands on the wolf in the Little Red Riding Hood story, and he squishes the wolf. And so maybe we model something about he sat on the wolf. And so you're going to stop. The adult's going to maintain eye contact and look expectantly at the learner while pausing for about 5 seconds to elicit an imitation of the 2 symbol utterance that was modeled. So basically what you're trying to do is get that child to say sat wolf. So sat on the wolf. So you're going to say he sat on the wolf. Sat wolf. All right. And then the adult is going to ask a WH question, and again providing that aided language input with the 2 symbols on the AAC system. So what happened? Maybe the wolf sat. Okay, you're going to model it. What happened? The wolf sat. Okay, then you're going to give a pause. You're going to answer it. So the adult answers the WH question and provides the language input using the 2 symbols. And then you're going to prompt and have that child give it back. So your turn, you show me. All right, so the idea is we've read it, we've modeled it, we've asked it, we've modeled it. Now that child gets an opportunity to answer it. So even in that first step on the read, you might not have the child respond. You might wait until after you've asked the question. And so the idea is that you're building up. They're seeing that model multiple times. You're asking specific WH questions, and now they can answer those questions. And the nice thing about this is you're going to start with 2 symbols, but the idea is you're going to build the symbols. So once the child does really well with 2, you're going to add a 3rd. Or you may even, after that child does 2, maybe you add a 3rd one in there. Okay, so maybe the big green boogie again. So here are some examples of boards that they've done with different studies. So they've done different Cat in the Hat books. And they've also done little critter books. The nice thing about little critter books is that they have the exact same characters, but they also have the exact same structure. And they build on each other. So the other thing I really think, if I was going to choose books for my library for my shared reading, is I would choose to put out books that are very similar, or have parents have very similar books. And so Llama Llama books, Pete the Cat books, Mo Williams, the Big Bad Boogie books, they build on it. It's the exact same author, and so the structure of those books ends up being very, very similar. So as you can see, you've got some WH questions, who, what, and where over here on the little critter, and who, what over here on the Dr. Seuss book. And so you've got different nouns, but then you've also got some verbs, same over here with little critter, in that you're going to model. So like little critter is eating. Okay, so maybe little critter was eating, then he was wearing, and then he went out into the rain and he got all wet. And so now you can model. The other thing, if you notice, is that they used symbols from the books instead of trying to to map onto, say, a board maker symbol. So they're just taking and they're doing a quick, scan of the book, they're cutting it out and they're using it. But then they're also using, as you can see, board maker pictures. So, those are board maker pictures that the children already knew. All right, so as I said earlier, they've looked at RAP with young school-age children, and it has been really successful. So they have looked at this with kids who are 3, 4, all the way up to 8 and 9. They've looked at the RAP technique with parents, paraprofessionals, general education teachers, because this can be done on a one-to-one or it can be done in a group. And so this is something that, if I was in a classroom, I think this shared reading RAP would be great because you can have your low-tech board. And by the way, all of their studies use low-tech boards. So these were not things that they were putting on the child's device, but rather these were boards. Again, this is how you can do it in a group setting, that they just copied, laminated, and now we can pass it around. Or each child had their own specific board and they could be pointing out different things. But again, if you're doing it in a big group setting, you can have your board, maybe an extra large size board, and you can be pointing and modeling, and then you can also model on the kids' boards in front of you. Again, RAP does a really nice job of showing an increase in vocabulary. We're showing a nice job of increase in syntax. So if we've got a kid who is significantly or often using only one symbol, I can't think of the word I was thinking of that starts with an S, only has one symbol that they're using, you can then build to 2. Now, once we have 2, we're going to build to 3. Now that we have 3, we're going to build to 4, 5, 6, and on. The other idea is adding morphosyntax, because what we really want to be doing is adding those plurals, adding the prefixes and the suffixes to change the meaning. So when you go to answer a question, we understand like, okay, this is 1 cat or 2 cats. So, there are 2 here. That's different than only 1. And then also just engagement. We see that kids are paying attention to the book. We see that they're paying attention to their peers. They're paying attention to their reading partner a little bit more. They're staying engaged within the activity for a longer period of time. That's one thing I hear often from parents is, well, we don't read books because they don't stay engaged. They don't pay attention long enough. Kids pay attention when we make it a little bit more exciting, right? We have to ask questions, we have to engage them, we have to bring it back to them. And so being able to do that. I see a question in the chat box about PowerPoint. Yes, you will have access to the PowerPoint at the very end of this. I will admit that I was noodling with it until the very last minute. And so I promise that I will put the final one up for you all to have. All right, so the second dialogic or shared reading strategy that you can use is called crowd in the car. So one way to remember this is you want to put the crowd in the car. I love this little graphic. It actually came from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I really like it because it sort of reminds you of everything that you're supposed to do within this dialogic or shared reading strategy. So when we're talking about crowd, we're talking about what are the questions that you're going to ask. So you can ask a completion question. So it's this little brown-headed red turtleneck person over here. So a completion question. So you might say, you're gonna start the sentence, who's afraid of the big bad? And then you leave it open with the idea that the child's going to complete it and they're going to say boogie, which if you go back to that book, you get to sing the song of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Boogie. You can do a recall question, which is what happened. So like what just happened or what comes next. So you're recalling additional information, or what was the wolf trying to do to Little Red Riding's grandma? You can ask an open-ended question. So this could be an open-ended question about the book. This could be an open-ended question to relate it back to their own background or personal experience. You could ask one of your multiple WH questions. So the who, when, where, why, how questions. So where did they go? How did they do it? When did they do it? And then you can also ask a distancing question. A distancing question is really nice because what a distancing question is doing is it's bringing it back to their background knowledge. So what do they already know about the topic? So if we're talking about Mama Llama Red Pajama, Mama Llama Red Pajama is all about a little boy going to bed, right? Or little llama going to bed. And so you can bring it back to, well, what does your bedtime routine look like? So what does your bedtime routine, what do you have to do within your bedtime routine? And we can put that all on a kid's AAC device and even talk about it. Or maybe you even have a sequence for it. So I think about some of the kids, a little boy that I worked with years ago, and he was having a real hard time with morning routines and bedtime routines. He was a little guy who was on the autism spectrum, was limited verbal, was using some AAC. And so I remember going to his house early one morning and taking pictures of what their morning routine looked like to put it in a book. And then we did the exact same thing for a bedtime routine. And we put it in a book. And so he was able to read that. And then we could actually start reading other books about bedtime routines or morning routines. And we could then relate it back to that routine that he was working on. So Llama Llama puts on his pajamas and then he brushes his teeth. Logan, what do you do? Okay. Oh, look, Logan, you put on your pajamas and you brush your teeth too. And so we had then pictures that we could refer back to talk about that. So then we could talk about, Logan, what do you do for your bedtime routine? I put on my pajamas and I brush my teeth. All right, so then as you're asking those questions, you're going to remember to have a 5-minute or a 5-second, not a 5-minute, a 5-second wait in between when you ask and when you model. So even though there's nothing on here that says remember to model, even when we're talking about the crowd questions, we're going to be modeling some answers. So again, we might be modeling two symbol responses, 3 symbol responses for whatever it is. So typically when we're reading, that's the car part. So after you've read a section, you're going to comment on what you just read. Then you want to ask that question. So you're going to ask one of your crowd questions. You're going to allow that child to respond, and then you're going to respond by adding a little bit more. So you're going to expand. Now you can also model in there. So you could ask the question, model, have the child respond, then you respond on what they just said, and then you expand it some more. All right, does that make sense? Okay, I'm hoping it does. If it doesn't, pop a question in there or in the chat box. Okay, so crowd on the car actually combines 2 different evidence-based approaches. So it's combining that car and that crowd. So like I just said, with the car, you're going to comment and you're going to wait. You're going to ask a question and you're going to wait. And you're going to respond by adding a little bit more. And each time we really want to have that 5 seconds or potentially more of wait time. So I think, 5 seconds is a good place to start. But depending on the child, you might need to wait a little bit longer. And that's okay to wait a little bit longer, as long as they're working on getting their response. And then we've got those 5 different types of questions to be asking. So with RAP, it was just asking a WH question, which might be appropriate for some kids. But you've got other kids who really we need to be asking a lot of different questions. So crowd questions, I think, are really nice because we can actually expand across to all sorts of different types of language opportunities. So, a completion is a very simple one. And if you think about books in which they have lots of repetitive phrases, that would be, a really great way to use completion questions. I also think for parents, completion questions are really simple. For teachers, general education teachers, if you're in the classroom working, whether you're a special education teacher or a speech language pathologist, being able to go into a classroom and model those completion questions. So thinking about other books that have lots of repetitive phrases, the wonky donkey. I love the wonky donkey. It's funny, right? I'm trying to think like what's another, if anybody has one that they can think of, throw it up in the chat box. but there are lots of books out there that have very repetitive phrases, right? So you're going to have something that repeats itself each time. All right, so here's an example of how you might use crowd in a car. And this actually came from Shelley Clendon back in 2014. They were using this strategy with some kids in New Zealand. And they were talking about the book, Where is the Green Sheep by Mem Fox, which is a fantastic book. And so if you think about, you've got the table here where they're talking about personal communication or the person communicating, the language used, and then the strategy used. So are they using a car or are they using a crowd? So what are they doing within car, within that shared reading? And then what kind of question did they ask? So on this one, the adult said, wow, look at the color of that sheep. So they commented, they waited. The child didn't respond at all. So what the adult did was they asked a crowd question, in which is, what color is the sheep at the farm? So this is distancing because they're not talking about the sheep in the book. They're talking about a sheep on the farm. So the idea is that you would answer white, right? Because the sheep in the green sheep book, it's not white. So they've asked a question, they wait, they're using a distancing prompt, but they also are using that WH question. Then we have a no response from the child. So what the adult does was navigate to the child's AAC system to find the color vocabulary, talks out loud about the pathway that needed to find the color. Then models by saying the sheep is green while pointing to green, then repeats the question, what color is the sheep at the farm? And the child selects white. You acknowledge, remember too, that the sheep on the farm is also white. And then using core vocabulary on the color page to supplement. So you see white, I see white and black sheep on the farm. The nice thing about this with this strategy is that if you're in a classroom or you're seeing a kid multiple times or a group of children multiple times in a week, you can actually use the exact same book and use the exact same strategies for crowd in a car every single day. So that's one thing I think, kids like reading the same books over and over and over again. And I highly recommend reading it because, again, you get the same vocabulary, you get that same opportunity within that shared reading space to expand upon your questions, to expand upon answering those questions correctly, expand upon just that engagement with that vocabulary and with that syntax. So on Monday, if we're using the book Blue Hat, Green Hat, we might talk about the title and the cover page of the story, show the students a few pages, talk about what you think the story might be about, read the story all the way through with lots of animation, and then ask the child what they liked about the story. So we can do some yes, no. Then as the week progresses, you read the story again on Tuesday. This time you're going to record oops into a single message, so maybe a step-by-step. You're going to read the story again and encourage the students to join in with the oops. So oops happens a lot in that book. And then go back through the story and look at all the pages in which the turkey says oops, and you could even use some visuals. If any of you are familiar with, oh goodness, I just lost it. Hold on, give me a minute and it'll come back to me. There is a reading program, and it uses a lot of the exact same strategies. The Tell Me program. The Tell Me program, if you have not seen the Tell Me program, I don't have anything about the Tell Me program in this talk, but the Tell Me program is also very, very scripted, and it talks about different books. And so being able to pull in visuals and prompts, and then being able to talk about different questions. So it also models a lot of the questions that you're going to see in that crowd section. But as you can see, if you kind of go through this, what you find is that you're reading the story and then you're starting to add to it. So you're adding on the language throughout the week. We're going to start simple and then we're going to add it. You could do this for 1 week. Honestly, I would do this and then I would pick up and I would do it again for a second week. Because that second week, the kids are going to be, I mean, they're going to be good here on Friday, but if you do it a second week, by the next Friday, they're going to be experts in it, and they're going to be able to ask and answer the questions themselves. All right, so now I want to talk about adding phonological awareness and why we might want to add phonological awareness to shared reading strategies. So why phonological awareness? Well, this is an umbrella term. However, phonological awareness is critical for academic success. So just a quick overview. I know most of you probably know what phonological awareness is, but just to make sure that we're on the same page, phonological awareness is made up of lots of different things. So one thing it's made up of is rhyme, so being able to rhyme. We also know that it's made up of segmenting sentences into words, so being able to identify that what I just said, segmenting sentences into words, actually has 4 words in it, not just one chunk. Knowing that words are made up of syllables and that those syllables then have a starting sound, or those words have a starting sound. And in addition, there's phoneme awareness. So I can take not only the syllables, but I can now break it down into every single individual phoneme. So I know that the word ship has 4 phonemes. There are 4 letters. It has 1 syllable, but it has 3 phonemes. So it only has 3 sounds, even though it has 4 letters. Just like cat. Cat has 3 letters, 1 syllable, but 3 phonemes. So there's a k, there's an at, and there's a t. So being able to sort of learn that certain letters go walking to make 1 sound, and that we can actually break words down all the way into their individual sounds and then build them back up. We know that kids who use AAC, because oftentimes we program a lot of information or a short phrase onto 1 symbol. I am guilty of doing this. Is that when they go to use that, they oftentimes don't realize that there's 2 or 3 words, 4 words, 5 words within that short 1 push. Okay. However, for reading, when we go to ask them to word read, because the hope is, or the plan is, that we will have every child reading and every child being able to do spelling, is that we have to break that down to understand that, yes, there are 2 or 3 words involved in it. All right, and we can also, the last piece of phonological awareness is Pig Latin, right? So that true ability to actually really manipulate words and sounds. Whereas you also have phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is really understanding that we have different sounds within all of our words. So mat has 3 sounds. We also know that it says the it says the and it says the t. So I can now map those sounds onto my letters. We also know that there are 44 phonemes. There are 26 letters, but there are 44 phonemes. So there are more sounds than there are letters. Okay, so being able to break that down for kids to understand that there's more to it. What we do know is, from the literature right now, is that it is unclear from the research what the phonological knowledge is of most children who use or benefit from AAC. One of the reasons behind this is that there's a lack of tests and tools. But wait, hold the boat. This could be changing, because there is now a test, and it's free, for testing phonological awareness in children with limited or nonverbal skills. And this just came out. So I threw it in here. This is one of the reasons that you don't have the slides, is because this is hot off the press. It's been out for about a month. But the Access to Literacy Assessment System for phonological awareness, the link is in this PowerPoint. However, I highly recommend, go, and once I pull it up, bookmark it. Forget about me and go check out this program instead, especially if you've got kids that you're like, I don't know what their phonological awareness is, and I would really like to be working on some more in-depth literacy activities. And Rebecca is already on it. Thank you, Rebecca. The Atlas is an adaptive measure of phonological awareness, and this is a test that's appropriate to use for children with and without disabilities. So children who are speaking and you're wondering all the way up to kids who have speech production issues. So we're talking about phonological awareness. As we said a few minutes ago, it's referring to understanding of the sound structure of language. And we do know from research that this is a very, very strong predictor of a child's reading achievement. So there's no more guessing or trying to adapt the CTOP, or which is the clinical test of phonological processing, which requires a verbal response, or the PAAT-2, which is the phonological awareness test, second edition, and the NU means norms were updated recently. Again, it requires a verbal response. And so one thing when we've talked a lot, and also this is a fantastic book if you're looking for something, because you're looking for some light reading, which it's not a tough read. But if you're looking for some information, a book about literacy, this also hot off the press. And actually I will, in a moment, I'll see if I can't find the link and pop it into the chat box, unless Rebecca's already on it. But we don't know what phonological awareness is, but we do know that in order to get kids to be good word readers, so we can get them to be spellers so that we can get them to be spellers and word readers at the exact same time, to get them to be good comprehenders so that they can have a job, they have to be able to read. We have to have phonological awareness in order to read. You can't memorize every single word. It's not possible. Oh, Rebecca, you are so good. So we can't guess all of the words. So you have to have phonological awareness. And some people will say, oh, but not every word has letter sound correspondence. Actually, they've done some studies on this, and we know for a fact that about 93% of words actually have clear letter sound correspondence, or at least part of the word has clear letter sound correspondence. It may not be that every single word always has this transparent clear letter sound correspondence, but we know that at least, even the word yacht, the end, the t has a clear letter sound correspondence. And so go check out this test. The other thing about this test, like ignore me for the rest of this time, is that it's free, okay? When else are you going to find a norm reference test? And this is norm reference. They have over 2,000 kids that they have run this, their procedures on. This was federally funded by the Department of Education for Dr. Skibble and her team. And one of the reasons that she developed that, she is a literacy researcher herself. She does early literacy, and she's phenomenal. Is that her eldest son was born with CP and uses an AAC device. And she found it very, very frustrating that no one could adequately evaluate the reading abilities of her son. And so because of it, she said, no, we're going to come up with a receptive measure for phonological awareness that can be used with all kids, not just Xander, but with everybody. And so it has norms, it is free, it is online. All you have to do is go and register, and you have access to everything. And so this is something that you could give via telehealth if you're trying to figure out what are the phonological abilities of this individual. So now we can figure out what we need to be working on. What are those base skills that we need to be working on so that we can get good reading? Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox on that one. I get excited about phonological awareness if you can't tell. Okay, so why is phonological awareness important for shared reading? Well, shared reading actually is just a really great time to work on phonological awareness skills. We can talk about the sounds. We can identify items that start with the same sound. We can talk about rhyming words. We can clap out the syllables. We can start to pair the letter sound correspondence or the letter sound relationships. So I have had a couple of students, and we were really interested in how we could actually model this. And so we actually took the RAP program, so that read, ask, answer, prompt program that Kathy Binger and Jennifer Kent Walsh had come up with. And what we decided to do is we added a couple of phonological components, specifically targeting questions and then one or two sounds within each book. And so we have had one participant, and this little guy and his mom participated. They were seen for 10 weeks. They were seen for probably about 20 minutes by the time they came into the building. They got down to the lab, they sat, we read the book, and they left. So these were quick sessions. In week 1, we had mom read If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and we just collected some baseline data. During weeks 2 through 9, we had her read If You Give a Mouse a Cookie again, but this time we provided boards. We also provided a step-by-step, actually 2 step-by-steps that had targeted sounds that were in the book. So one of them was the sound for mouse, because when you give a mouse a cookie, mouse is said multiple times over, and so now is a really great opportunity to talk about for mouse. The other reason we could do it was because the child's name started with M, and also, you know, he was with his mom, and mom starts with what we did was we provided questions within the book. We put them on sticky notes, and we modeled for the parent before we started week 2 how to use the boards, how to include the step-by-step with the sound on it, and then how to just ask those questions and then prompt and then wait for her son to do it. During week 10, we provided her a different book, which was Pete the Cat, and we were just looking for generalization. So we took out the sticky notes, but we still had the same step-by-steps, we still had boards, and could she come up with questions on her own? So what I want to do is show you first, this is their very first session. So this is their baseline session. We're just gonna watch about 2 minutes of it, and I just want you to be looking like, what about their reading? What's going on?
Mouse that went with it. It was so cute. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Where's the mouse? And then you see the TV. We like it. You ready? Mouse. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Open. Open. Look at all the cookies. Makes cookies. Let's turn the page. Turn. Oh, there it is. Give a mouse a cookie. Ready? Let's turn the page. There's the mouse. See the mouse in this one. When you give him the milk, there's the milk. Turn the page. Turn the page. You'll probably ask for a straw. When he's finished, he'll ask for a napkin. Look at the mouse. He looks full of cookies. I know. Let's see what happens next. Let's see what happens next. Take a good stretch.
Okay, so as you can see, mom's working really hard to keep this little guy engaged within the story. So I have a question for you. What did you notice about that reading? And that goes on for, she was reading for about 7 minutes. Yeah, so she did. She started with that mouse sound, all right? So she was trying to bring it back to his background knowledge. She was giving him a little squeak, squeak, squeak. Absolutely. What else did people notice? Did you see her asking any questions? Yep, she did say open. She did a nice job of talking about what she was doing. So opening, let's turn the page. She was giving a lot of nice commands for him, like what we're going to do next. And he also, as you watch it, she gives a lot of nice comments about what's going on. Oh, do you see? Oh, look, he's got a whole lot of cookies. He's eating a bunch of cookies, munch, munch, munch. And so she added a lot of really nice language. And as you go through it, you don't see her asking a lot of questions, but she does do a lot of really nice things. Some of the other things is her positioning, right? So she tried to keep him on her lap. He didn't like that, so she moved him. So they still have that shared reading space if they're looking at the book, but he doesn't see her at all. The other thing to know about this little guy is he has a hearing loss, and so he actually does need some feedback from the speaker's face in addition to just hearing it. As you can tell, he spent most of his time trying to close the book. He was using a lot of his behavior to try to end that activity. And if you were to watch that video all 7 minutes, you'll find that he actually really starts using a lot of behavior to try to end it. She did not talk about his behavior or tell him, no, that's right, Amy. And actually she doesn't at all. She does a really great job of never saying no or saying, oh, we're stopping because of this. She just read the book to him, and she does a really nice job of modeling the book. Okay, but now I want to show you a video of them about 7 weeks later. So this is their session about 7 weeks later. So they've been practicing these strategies once a week. They had been coming in, let's just take a peek at this one.
Can I have the cover? Nice. Nice. Mommy. Mouse. Mouse. Okay. Let's hit that with our leg. Hit that with our leg. Look. Give a mouse a cookie. Mouse. Okay. Let's see. We don't need to eat. We really don't. Okay. Give a mouse a cookie. Nice. Here. There we go. Look. Let's take a wait. Nice. Mouse. What's he eating? What's the one eating? Look. It's eating cookies. Okay, are you ready? What happens next? If you give a mouse a cookie, let's turn the page. How about we turn the page? We turn the page. He's going to ask for a glass of milk. That's right. Let's see. Milk. What does milk start with? What sound is milk? Milk. That's right. Milk. When you give him the milk, look. What does the mouse want with his cookies, Mace? What's the mouse want with his cookies? He wants some milk. Milk. Say milk. Nice. Mommy. There I go. Yeah. Oh, look. What you got on today? Look. Say, Mickey Mouse. Good job. Okay, let's see what happens next. When you give him his milk, let's see what happens next. So turn the page. He'll probably ask you for a straw. Look, there's the straw in the milk. When he's finished, he'll ask for a napkin. Nice. Nice. Why does he need a napkin? What does that start with? Mouse. What's next? What's next? What about mommy? What about mommy? Mommy. Nice.
All right. So what did you notice about that interaction? She's facing him. Yes, Tammy. She actually changed her positioning. We never said anything about changing her position. She automatically changed her position. Yeah, the behaviors were better because he could see her and he could interact with the book. So suddenly the book became this shared interaction space between himself and his mom. And now we really can talk about going back and forth, back and forth. And yeah, she was really focused on that M sound and having him recognize it. So being able to talk about how that was his sound for his name and talking about how it was her sound for her name and how she could talk about how it was, part of the milk and the mouse. And oh, all of a sudden we've got Mickey Mouse on our handkerchief. And so how that also starts with so now she's relating it back. So yeah, so my observation, mom naturally changed her positioning. We never asked her to do that. The engagement, she was more at ease. If you even notice, like her body was just calmer. If you look at the time that she spent reading with that interaction versus the very first interaction, we noticed that she actually doubled her reading time. So every time she came in, she was actually spending more and more time reading with him, being able to ask the questions, commenting on that M sound or on the B sound that we were talking about. She was going off the book script and then she was able to add to it. So even though we had some questions and even though she had the actual book that she's reading, she's talking a little bit more about it and she's being able to relate it back. She was modeling that M sound for mouse, but also for the names. And then she was also doing praise and engagement, like, oh, good job, I hear you. She was also waiting. If you noticed, her wait time increased significantly. So being able to wait and allow him to respond to what it was that she was asking or what it was that she was modeling for him. And so the other thing to note with this little guy is that as they continued to do this, mom even reported that he had not said her name previously, and he actually was starting to say her name. So at the end of the 8 weeks, he was actually trying to vocalize her name. And dad was like, hey, when are we going to start working on the D sound? Because I'm pretty sure that I'm being left out, and I want him to say my name too. So that was one thing with him, was that he really, by overemphasizing and really explicitly teaching that phonological awareness activity, being able to specifically teach that sound of he had to have several interactions with it. So he's changing his phonological system. All right, so when we actually went back and we looked at how many modeled phonological awareness responses he had. So here you can see down here in the first session, he didn't have any. And by the very last session, we had about 52 different modeled phonological awareness responses from mom. So mom didn't model anything at the beginning. And by the end of the 10 weeks, she was modeling 52 times. When we looked at modeled language responses, so her modeling the language and being able to expand upon it, we see that here at the beginning, we really didn't have any modeled language responses. And by the end of the session, we had 41. This dip right here, if you look at all of the tests or all of the graphs, was actually a day that they came in and she was like, something's just not right. And sure enough, they went to the doctor afterwards and he had a double ear infection. So there was a reason he wasn't doing as well, and mom's behavior was also changed slightly because of his behavior. So the little guy's behavior, he wasn't as engaged, so she also was backing off a little bit. When we looked at the unscripted child-directed speech phonological awareness, so how many times was he actually engaging? So some of these are he's just pressing it because he's interested in pressing it. And other times he was much more engaged in actually trying to say something. And mom then responded to it and he said it again. As you can see, we had 0 here at the beginning, and by the end we were over 100. And then also we looked at the child independent use of the device of phonological awareness. And what we're seeing is that he was more likely to use it by the end. So the more that we talked about it, the more that we modeled it for him in the 10 weeks, he was actually using it. So the sort of the take home with all of this and with these graphs and just kind of thinking about him is that I think that you can use and you can model phonological awareness. Now, he was with us for 10 weeks, and then that was the end of this. But we're really interested in if you are interested, we'd love to talk to you because we're still collecting some data. But I do think that phonological awareness can be taught with either rap or crowd. And I encourage anyone to incorporate those phonological awareness activities. So just the simple of choosing one sound that's happening often in the book. So maybe it's the for mouse, or it's the p for Pete the cat, because you're going to talk about Pete, 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 Pete. Being able to have that p, 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 knowing that we can just talk about those sounds and we can engage with those sounds. Using the keyboard to model the letter and then you voicing the sound, using apps like I Speak Word that actually models letter sounds, not the names. I Speak Word is, I think it's like $10 these days. And you've got the entire keyboard and you can just drag the different letters up onto the keyboard. So if you've got a kid who has pretty good pointer, or can use a stylus, being able to drag those letters up. And now actually you can start spelling things like mouse or mom or dad, and being able to talk about those different sounds. Even talking about what rhymes or what sounds alike. I think that we don't have enough data to actually come out and tell you like, hey, this is specifically what you should be doing for phonological awareness activities within a shared reading. But I think we can model it off of what we do know with children who are using speech, and then we can try to we can then do some studies to look exactly on how we should expand it. So I would say model the sounds, bring the sounds back. So we've got that sound. What else sounds like or what else starts with or with the b if you're going to use the big bad boogie. All right. So in the last few minutes, I just wanted to talk about some out of the box ideas and then open it up for questions. So basically the new normal, which is a lot of potentially online at the moment, or at a distance. So I think when we're talking with parents or even talking with teachers, when we're talking about shared reading, maybe we just choose to talk about one question type to work on. So during a week, having a family talk about one type of question. So this week, every time we read, we're going to stop and we're going to try to use the completion question, or we're going to try to ask a where question, or we're going to try to ask a what question. Choosing one sound to model and then point it out. So like we did in our study, choosing the M sound and being able to model that over and over and over again. I think if you're using some sort of telehealth or Zoom, you can use YouTube or PowerPoint to show books, and you can stop and you can ask the questions. So one thing that we've been doing a lot is creating books or scanning the books into PowerPoint. And then what we've done is we've actually created like a little bubble. So here on this bottom point here, PowerPoint or Boardmaker, we've added a bubble with the question. So as you're clicking through, all of a sudden that question appears. And now it reminds everyone like, oh, we need to ask a question about this. Or it draws like a little arrow and there's a little box. I personally like to use the little question or the ask bubble or the thought bubble, because I think it allows us to stop and everybody knows what that symbol looks like. So if you've got parents or you've got other professionals that you're working with, paraprofessionals, they stop and they see it and they say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to add something to this. The nice thing about if you're putting your books onto PowerPoint or any other digital measure is that you can use them over and over and over again. So it isn't like this is just a one time and we're done. We could put this on a tablet and all of a sudden now we've got it on a tablet and we can use it over and over again. But having that little bubble makes us stop. It makes us ask the question without having to say, oh, what was that sticky note or what was that thing that we were supposed to ask? It allows you to have that shared interaction, that shared reading time. Notebooks, the reality is you could actually do shared reading with a TV show. So you've got Daniel Tiger Neighborhood on demand, right? Or Wildcrafts on demand. You could just pause the show. So maybe they ask a question or maybe you're going to ask the question. You watch a little bit and then you pause it and you ask the question. For some parents, sometimes we just need to have a little TV. But I think that there are certain shows out there that definitely have very good vocabulary and definitely use really great sentence structure and could be really beneficial for kids. And it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, language happens not just in a book, but it happens everywhere. So we can actually use it in all of these other situations as well. You could put a sticky note in books for questions or an envelope sticker. So those big envelope stickers, if you just want to take and put it right there. Sticky notes sometimes come out. So I tend to lean away from sticky notes, but I think sticky notes are pretty easy. We did a study recently where we put a QR code. So the parent just with their phone had to zoom over it, it would just pop up onto their phone. That's extra. So honestly, I kind of like the board maker and adding the bubble to it the most lately because I think it's a little bit easier. And then I think also just repetition, giving parents the okay that you can use a book multiple times over, and that books that have repetitive phrases are even better. So it's sort of like I keep telling my students in class, and I think some of them are actually here today, that repetition is really key. So we have to repeat it, because once you get it a few times, you're going to get a little bit better, and then you repeat it again, you get a little bit better and a little bit better. I kind of think of it as like a kid walking, right? So they don't just take 2 steps and then they're perfect at it. They have to take hundreds, if not thousands of steps before they get really good at it. And so repetition, I think, is really key. I think also giving parents the okay to not follow the reading script in a book, that you don't have to just sit and read it from front to back and be done with it, but rather you can have some fun with it and you can talk about it in different ways. Also, because we're in this new normal and we're visual or we're virtual, using books that are already in the home. So Dolly Parton Imagination Library, we didn't partner with them. I work closely with the lady that runs it here in Knox County. And so she gave us a list of all of the books that they've been using. And this summer, my students actually came up with lesson plans. And so the lesson plans not only include ways to use the book, thinking about what's the key vocabulary in each of these books, but also thinking about how are you going to increase syntax. The other thing that we did was we added boards. So there's low-tech boards for all of them. So we're currently working with IT at the University of Tennessee to upload all of those to the Tackle, which is our lab website. So if in about a week, you give us about a week, and you're interested, head on over there. We have not only the Dolly Parton Imagination Library books from at least the last 2 years, but we also have several other books. And we've tried to create those books so that you can use them digitally. So there is the possibility that there's already a PowerPoint created for you and you can download it, you can ask those questions, and then the questions for reading comprehension are already there. So you don't have to go and try and reinvent the wheel. And then also use the books from the same author. Obviously, you can tell I like the Give a Mouse a Cookie series, because now we can give a mouse a cookie, we can get really good at it, and now we can pick up the if you give a dog a donut, or if you give a cat a cupcake, if you give a moose a muffin, and we have the exact same structure, and the kid's going to feel really successful in reading that book, and we've got similar characters, because that mouse seems to pop up in all of those. There's also a series on Amazon, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and so with that comment earlier about television, you have the kids go back and watch it. Pete the Cat, I think, is a really good one. Again, pretty similar structure. Llama Llama, the Nuffle Bunny, Gerald and Piggy, or the Pigeon books. So again, those are Mo Williams books. And then Fancy Nancy is just great because it's got really great vocabulary. Also, a lot of these shows, actually, every single one of them has some sort of TV, or there's a YouTube station in which there's a show. And so there's some carryover. So not only can you talk about it in the context of the book, but if you watch the show, now you're reading the book again, you can talk about what happened in the show compared to what happened in the book. All right, so that is all I have. I want to thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions and comments. I do have a shameless plug in that we are looking for teachers and SLPs and parents to help us evaluate some technology that we're developing in our lab right now. And if you're interested, I'd love for you to contact us. All of the studies are remote, and we are providing $25 gift cards. We have developed a speech-to-text vocabulary application for students with the idea that this could be something to actually help increase vocabulary access in a child's AAC device. So if you and I are talking and we're talking about volcanoes in the classroom, and the system is listening, and we say volcano and lava and pume and those types of things, what happens is that it will populate into the AAC device. And so now all of a sudden that child has access to that vocabulary. So we're looking for people to tell us how they would use it or what they think is good about it or isn't good about it. So shameless plug, but please ask questions about shared reading or just reading in general. And also if you want access to lesson plans for books, again, in about a week, we'll have a bunch of stuff on our website, the UTackle website, which is there in that green, which my daughter, who's 6, was telling me that my colors were very awesome this morning when she was looking over my shoulder. And also I'm trying to do social media, Facebook and Twitter. So come check us out. I'm not very good at this yet, but we'd love to hear what your needs are, and see if we can't offer some suggestions or help. I love reading, and I want to figure out how we can get as many kids out there to read and to read well as possible. So I'm going to be quiet now and see if there's any questions. Is everybody having a good conference? I'll ask another question. It's a very different way of doing it. Comfort of your own home or your school classroom. Good. Hey, Kelsey Boring, how are you? Oh yeah, so Kelsey's one of my former students, and I used to throw chocolate. And if we were together, I probably would have a big bowl of chocolate because, yeah, we have lots of chocolate and dirty jokes. Oh, Mallory. Oh, Mallory's also one of my former students. Yeah, Alexa. By the way, if you have kids who use AAC and you have access to Alexa, you can actually plug it in there to have your kids then ask Alexa to tell a joke. And then Alexa can tell you lots of good jokes, and then you can add it so that kids can go out and ask the jokes. We've been getting a lot of pilot jokes here at our house recently. Alexa's on a pilot kick. Random fact right there. Hello, Karen. It's good to see you. I wish I could see your faces. I see your names. Oh, hello, Karen. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Hey, your
Good.
conference, your session's been great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's hard to tell. I'm not gonna lie, friends. I feel like we're all friends at this point. It's really hard to do things on Zoom just because I see all your names and then I just sort of talk to myself. Um, and I don't know about you all, but I like to see people's faces. I like it when we're all in one room together. But someday, the normal will be back someday. So um, actually, I was talking with the chancellor at the UTHSC today. I was in a meeting with him earlier this morning, and he was saying that 3 companies actually have vaccines for COVID, and he's thinking it's going to be quite positive. So we can be hopeful. All right, well, I'll stay on here for the next 5 minutes if anybody has any questions. If not, or you think of a question later, please email me either at the jmccar21 or at our lab website, which is the utackle at uthsc.edu. And again, if you have any questions or comments or would like to know more about what we're doing, or if in a week you're like, hey, I can't find those lesson plans, let me know, and we're working with IT to get those up. So hopefully they'll be up and you can have them. And I'd much rather have you all have them than for them just to sit on my computer. And go check out the Big Bad Boogie books. We're really liking those at our house right now. What session are people going to next? Anybody have one picked out? Not sure what's next. I think is there a break, Rebecca?
Not for me.
Well, no, I know not for you.
It depends what session people are going to. I've got one starting right now in 3 minutes, but it depends if people are doing that session or they're going to different ones. So depends what their plans are.
Oh, good, good. You're in the was it Command Central over there?
Mission control.
Mission control. I was gonna say, how many different tablets and computers do you actually have open and flipping through?
Right now in front of me, I have a laptop, a desktop, and my phone. And then outside of this office, there's an iPad, a laptop, and then a phone, and then another desktop and a phone.
Good.
So we're rocking and rolling.
You're rocking and rolling. Your desktop sort of sounds like mine at the moment, which has a laptop, a desktop, a phone, and a tablet. But I'm trying to keep all of them off except for the laptop.
And then about 20 tabs on each.
Oh, at least, right?
At least. And multiple browsers, yes.
Yes. Well, good. Wow. Again, thank you for those that came. I hope that it was somewhat informative. And again, please reach out and ask questions if you have any, because Rebecca has to go start another one. We'll wait another 30 seconds. Otherwise, go enjoy another great session, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Thanks, Rebecca, for being my amazing Amazon
link finder.
And yeah, the things you don't think about when you put together the PowerPoint, because you're used to like just being able to flip around on things. So
that's right. All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.